it's best to leave it alone if you don't know what kind of world system Steiner has in mind, which would have to be there for his taxation ideas to become operative. And if you're not willing to do this, not willing to study the history of taxation even, it's best to not touch it and say nothing about it. But don't think that Steiner hasn't got an idea about this.
What is special about this junction when an entrepreneur gets capital? Why is that like the Chinese thinking?
It goes in this direction where, on the face of it, is a tax on expenditure, but not a sales tax, so it can't be a tax on expenditure really. It's, but I think the clue is in what you're trying to achieve with any tax, and where would be the best incidence of this tax. So if you're trying to, this is just me trying to understand it. If you're trying to achieve some kind of equitable distribution of wealth, there are two ways you could go about this. One way would be when someone's made some money, you tax it and you share it out with those who didn't make it. That's putting it a bit crude, but that describes the whole not-for-profit world. Thank God there are for-profits, because we live off those crumbs that they generate, right?
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of not-for-profit world in the sense that it's a secondary phenomenon, and the real phenomenon is the for-profit world. If you had a Richard Eels company, you'd never need a non-for-profit. That also is a huge taxation topic, by the way, right? In a real taxation, there would be no not-for-profits, none whatsoever. And the company I'm involved in Switzerland, it's a company, but we are taxed very specifically by the Swiss tax authority. We get a 50% rebate on our income tax because they can see when they visit our company and they can see in our accounts, we carry a lot of young people. We do a lot of social things with our company, which every normal company say, we're not going to do that. That's too expensive. So we say, we'll do it. We'll demonstrate the expense or the inefficiency this generates in such a way that the tax authorities in Switzerland, they said, okay, now we see what you're doing. Going forwards, you pay 50% of income tax on your company. And we give you a 5-year rebate. The Swiss tax authority, they do not mess around. They're very clinical. If you make a mistake in tax in Switzerland, you're automatically charged 5 years backwards. They don't say, oh, sorry. They just assume you should have understood, and they would tax you back. They would identify the mistake, how much you should have paid, and they would just multiply that by 5, and you pay the bill tomorrow. It's clinical, right? But it's social, because it's just, why are you avoiding shared costs that you want to have the benefit of? Why are you doing this? We're going to be very clinical about this because it's antisocial. So I totally get it. But the same Swiss tax authority will say, well, if we look at your company and we see you're carrying costs which a company wouldn't normally do, and therefore we have to carry them, then it's cheaper for us to give you 50% income tax rebate than to tax you 100%, and then we have to give it to somebody to pick up the mess. So we're happy. And especially because in your accounts, you detail this in great detail. So we're not, it's very calculated. So I can give you other examples. That's just one I know about directly. There is another one I know about in Seattle with 4 gas stations, but I won't go there, where the tax authority can see, the incidence is not going to have the effect we want. So if we tax you 100%, but then we have to, so now we've got this money, we can pick up these young people doing heroin on the street. It would be much better if we taxed you 50% and they got a job in your restaurant and learned to do something in life. I'm being a bit simplistic about it. But the point about any taxation is what effect are you trying to have? And is it just a political Robin Hood stealing other people's wealth? Or are you trying to achieve equitable distribution of wealth by getting everybody to be wealth creative? So the idea I had earlier of, instead of having workers in a factory, everyone was self-employed. They would then experience, in fact, they have to employ capital in order to make doors of a car. they would become mini capitalists in a world where there are only capitalists. This is very important, where everybody is now a capitalist, where everybody has to be aware. And you see it in the accounts. At the end of the day, my income must be above my expenses, so that the so-called profit minus tax is an addition to the capital on my balance sheet, meaning every entrepreneur of any scale will then experience, he never buys and sells labor. No way does it ever come to the equation. He just says, how can I serve my customers in such a way that I have an increase in capital? And on your balance sheet, if you're self-employed, you have an increase in capital. If you employ a secretary, that is an expense on your balance sheet. But the money you take is a reduction of your capital. This is very important. It's very precise. And so if you become a real entrepreneur, self-employed, you will experience it's all about using your skills to serve a market or people so that you are profitable, true price and all the rest of it, because your profit, when it goes on the balance sheet, is now own capital. I have generated capital. And now you can see that if you want to make the distribution of wealth equitable, you can either wait till someone's made a lot of money and then tax it and share it with everybody else who's made none, or you can get everybody to be wealth creators. That would transform the universe. And I think this is what Steiner has. No one's ever said this. I've never said this in public. I've never seen anything written about this. But as I say, I'm very clear. If the reason for taxation is to achieve some kind of equitability in wealth, without going into the whole question, Steiner says, if you don't pay true prices, you create inequitability in wealth. Without going there, if everybody was a wealth creator, strictly speaking, they knew that their revenue stream above their expenses was them generating capital. They would never look to someone else for their capital. They would just look to themselves. And this and therefore
the instant of
sorry?
Yeah.
The
instant of taxation is when they use their own capital.
So that's why I'm saying, so I've never said this before in this detail, but if I understand this, and if he's saying not a tax on income, but a tax on the capital implicated, taken hold of by an entrepreneur, then I can begin to see this must be where he's going. He never went there because no one listened to this story, right? But it must be, but this is me speaking as an entrepreneur. It must be somewhere like this, because in the world I'm describing, there's no income to tax. And even if I look at, I'm self-employed, when I look at my accounts, I have my income and I have my expenses as a business person. But it's very, very important. My income from a tax point of view is not an expense. What I pay you, if I hire you to do something, that's an expense, and how you deal with it, I don't know. But my income is not the income that I show in my accounts. That's the income of my business, less the expense of my business. And my income is transferred to the capital account. And if I take anything out, it's a reduction of capital.
Yeah.
That's where I get my income is actually a reduction of capital. And so it must be there that Steiner's moving the instance of taxation to this point. Mm-hmm. This isn't a sales tax.
Yeah.
And
that's where value is created, right? We always say it with the inner impulses of the human being, that's combining with money, that's exactly where new values are created. So to put tax there makes sense.
And it's you know, we should pause this, because I'm not saying he says that, no way. But if you take what he says in the Social Future lectures, as explained by Behrens for an Anglo-Saxon, or at least for California mind, and these are very savvy people in California in terms of normal business, and then you try and understand it. That's why I say he's really talking some kind of, you tax the instance of taxation, of distaxation, is where someone gets hold of capital. Quite what that means, I don't know, because you might say, oh my God, as an entrepreneur, let's not have that. Thank you very much. It's trouble enough. but half of the taxes that exist in the world would disappear if you did this.
Yeah.
So you have to be very careful. Right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of taxes which are not necessary because their incidence is ineffective. So you have another one. And it's so complicated, and so much taxation is in response to the egotism of the human being. If you take this out, a lot of tax would just disappear.
Yeah, and then it's not a burden. It's not a burden as we might think of it.
No, it's just like I even say I live in a town, and yes, we pay our rates, and people say, oh, the rates have gone up, and I say, okay, but what do you get for your rates? You get to walk around the street, you get to have a fire engine when it's just a cost. And can you do that? You can either do that collectively, which would be a lot cheaper, or you can have your own fire engine. Make your choice. But people don't think like this. They just think it's an imposition because that's their origin. They come from right. They go from might. The way I describe it, that taxes are always right, but the foundation, the further you go back, they're based on might, and in the future they're based on light. Not complicated. You just become the king yourself, and you impose on you the tax, which in fact is a collective sharing in costs, and is a hell of a lot cheaper than having your own fire engine, your own street, your own, these places where you have natural monopolies, like the streets of a town. This is a natural monopoly. If you want to have your own street, you're going to have to, put a toll booth either end and explain to people why it's your street and not theirs. Good luck. All that disappeared, when streets became common property, paid for by the entire population. Even down the road here, there's an old toll road along the beach, you can go to the toll house because that was a shortcut from one side of town to the other. And the guy who owned this whole town, he put a booth in the middle of that road because it was his road. So if you want to take the shortcut, you're going to have to pay him some money. It's still the sign there saying how much you're going to pay him. And it's very interesting. That was then. Now all the town's roads are funded by the entire population. So no way is he going to get any money on his toll. It's the whole, we've got what I would call more a natural monopoly. You can't stop it. But that would be collectively financed by those who benefit from their collective financing.
Yeah.
And this is just taxation by light, just by a conscious understanding and of the benefit to me of shared assets. It's not, even my self-centered part of me should understand this.